The brush sweeps across the ancient stone, dust swirling in the dim light of the excavation lamp. A glint of gold catches the archaeologist's eye, just enough to send a shiver down their spine. This isn't just another relic. It's a whisper from a civilization that once ruled the world with an iron fist and a vision so grand, its echoes still haunt our history books. The Assyrian Empire, a name that conjures images of towering ziggurats, fearsome winged bulls, and armies that could make the earth tremble. But here's the astonishing truth: for all their power, for all their grandeur, the Assyrians left behind secrets hiding in plain sight. Mysteries so obvious we've walked right past them for centuries without seeing the truth. Think about that for a moment. How could an empire so vast, so meticulously documented in stone and clay, still have secrets lurking in the open? The answer lies in the shadows of history, in the assumptions we've made, the details we've glossed over, the stories we've told ourselves without questioning. The Assyrians didn't just build cities, they engineered propaganda, buried clues in their art, and encoded messages in their very architecture. And today, we're going to uncover 25 of these hidden truths, each one more mind-bending than the last. Picture this: a colossal stone relief in a museum, visited by thousands every year. To the casual observer, it's just another depiction of a king's victory. But look closer: the arrangement of the figures, the symbols tucked into the background, even the posture of the ruler, none of it is accidental. The Assyrians were masters of symbolism, and every chisel mark was a deliberate act of storytelling. Some of these secrets were meant to intimidate enemies, others were meant to communicate with the gods, and a few, well, they might have been meant for us future generations who'd finally piece together the puzzle. That's the journey we're about to take together. From the overlooked carvings in their palaces to the cryptic inscriptions on their weapons, we'll unravel the mysteries that have been waiting silently for someone to notice. So tell me, are you ready to see the Assyrian Empire in a way you never have before? The dust of Nineveh still clings to the most revolutionary secret the Assyrians ever buried: not gold, not weapons, but words. Thousands of them pressed into fragile clay tablets and tucked away in a labyrinth of rooms beneath the palace of King Ashurbanipal. This wasn't just a collection of scrolls, it was the world's first systematically organized library, a treasure trove of knowledge so advanced it would take centuries for the rest of humanity to catch up. And here's what's staggering: though we've known about it since the 1850s, we've barely scratched the surface of what it truly contains. Walk through the British Museum today, and you'll see row after row of these unassuming tablets, over 30,000 of them, each one a silent witness to an intellectual revolution. The Assyrians didn't just hoard knowledge, they catalogued it with meticulous precision. Medical treatises detailed surgeries and herbal remedies that wouldn't be rediscovered for another 2,000 years. Astronomical records tracked the movements of planets with eerie accuracy. Even epic poetry, like the Epic of Gilgamesh, survived here when the rest of the world had forgotten it existed. But the real shock: scholars estimate that less than a third of these tablets have been fully translated. Why does this matter? Because every untranslated line could rewrite history. Imagine stumbling upon a tablet that reveals the Assyrians mapped the stars in ways we never thought possible, or that their doctors understood germ theory long before microscopes existed. Some tablets even hint at lost technologies, like advanced metallurgy or engineering techniques that defy the era's assumed capabilities. Yet for all our modern tools, decoding them is painstaking work. The script is ancient Akkadian, a language so complex that a single symbol can have multiple meanings depending on context. One mistranslation could obscure a breakthrough. And then there's the chilling possibility that Ashurbanipal's librarians hid certain texts intentionally. Some tablets were found sealed in jars, as if their contents were too dangerous for common eyes. Were they preserving forbidden knowledge, protecting secrets that even the empire's elites feared? Until we decipher them all, we're left with an unsettling truth. The world's first library still guards mysteries that could redefine our understanding of human ingenuity. So next time you hear about the Assyrians as mere conquerors, remember their greatest weapon wasn't the sword, it was the pen. Standing at the gates of an Assyrian palace, you wouldn't just see a statue, you'd feel the weight of an empire's divine power staring back at you. The Lamassu, those towering winged bulls with human faces, weren't mere decorations. They were psychological masterpieces engineered to awe and terrify. Carved from solid stone, each one weighed as much as 30 tons, a literal and metaphorical barrier between the mundane world and the king's sacred domain. But here's what most visitors miss. These creatures were designed with a deliberate flaw, or rather, a flawlessness so precise it defied nature. Take a step to the side and you'll notice something impossible. The Lamassu have 5 legs, not a mistake but a stroke of genius. From the front, they stand firm, all 4 legs planted like an unshakable sentinel. But from the side, they appear to stride forward, eternally in motion. This wasn't just artistic cleverness, it was a statement. The Assyrian king wasn't merely a ruler, he was a force of cosmic order, present and powerful from every angle. Even the statues couldn't be pinned down to a single perspective. Now, look closer at those wings. Each feather is meticulously carved, not just for beauty, but as a map of celestial hierarchy. The Lamassu borrowed elements from 3 realms, the bull's body for earthly strength, the eagle's wings for divine connection, and the human head for intellectual supremacy. Together, they embodied the king's God-given right to dominate land, sky, and thought. And those curled beards, not just fashion, each ring symbolized wisdom, a visual echo of the gods themselves. But the most chilling detail lies in their positioning. Lamassu always appeared in pairs, flanking gateways like silent judges. To enter the palace, you had to walk between them, their eyes following your every step. Archaeologists found cuneiform texts describing this as the path of submission, a ritual where visitors, whether diplomats or defeated enemies, were psychologically broken before even reaching the throne. The message was clear, resistance was futile. The gods had already blessed the king's authority, and these hybrids of heaven and earth enforced it. Yet for all their intimidation, there's a haunting vulnerability to these guardians. Many were deliberately mutilated when the empire fell, their faces smashed by conquerors eager to erase Assyrian dominance. Even in ruin, they whisper a final lesson: no power, no matter how meticulously crafted, lasts forever. So the next time you see a Lamassu in a museum, don't just admire its scale. Look into its eyes and read the empire's unspoken manifesto carved in stone. When enemies saw the Assyrian war machines rolling toward their walls, they weren't just facing an army, they were staring down monsters. The empire's engineers didn't just build siege weapons, they crafted nightmares. Take the battering ram, a brute force tool as old as war itself, but the Assyrians transformed it into something far more sinister. Cloaked in layers of bronze and topped with grotesque animal heads, snarling lions, roaring bulls, these rams weren't just functional. They were psychological warfare on wheels. Imagine the terror of watching a colossal metal beast charge your gates, its gaping maw spewing flames, its hollow eyes glowing with reflected torchlight. This wasn't just engineering, it was theater designed to break spirits before the first blow even landed. Recently translated clay tablets from Nineveh's military archives reveal just how calculated this terror was. Engineers wrote detailed manuals specifying how to amplify the ram's roar by fitting its hollow head with resonating copper plates. The sound wasn't just noise, it was tuned to mimic the growl of mythical demons, creatures from Mesopotamian legends said to herald the end of days. And the innovations didn't stop there. The same tablets describe hydraulic systems using pressurized animal bladders to pump flammable liquid through the ram's mouth, allowing it to spit fire like a dragon. These weren't crude contraptions, they were precision instruments of fear, each detail calibrated to unnerve. Then there were the siege towers, multi-story behemoths disguised as moving mountains. Wrapped in dampened hides to repel fire arrows, their facades were carved with reliefs of gods trampling enemies, but the real stroke of genius, the wheels. Assyrian texts boast of axles fitted with copper bearings, reducing friction so efficiently that witnesses swore the towers glided like specters. One account from a besieged city describes defenders freezing in panic, convinced the structures were levitating by dark magic. What's most startling isn't just the technology, it's the paperwork. The Assyrians documented everything. Clay schematics show pulley systems for raising drawbridges, even adjustable counterweights to stabilize towers on uneven terrain. These weren't the haphazard inventions of trial and error. They were the product of a military-industrial complex centuries ahead of its time. Yet for all their sophistication, the empire understood a primal truth. The most potent weapon isn't steel or fire, it's the moment an enemy's will snaps. And when the dust cleared, the real message was carved into every shattered gate. Resistance was madness. The Assyrians didn't conquer cities, they conquered minds. History got it wrong. The Hanging Gardens of Babylon, that legendary wonder of the ancient world, might not have been Babylonian at all. The real horticultural marvel likely bloomed hundreds of miles north in the heart of Assyria, engineered by a king so obsessed with water, he turned his entire capital into an artificial paradise. Here's the twist: the proof has been hiding in plain sight for centuries, etched into the stone walls of Sennacherib's palace and scattered across the arid plains near Mosul. Start with the technology. While Babylonian gardens relied on labor-intensive bucket chains to lift water, Assyrian engineers devised something revolutionary: the screw pump. These bronze spirals, some still embedded in ancient irrigation channels near Nineveh, could lift water continuously with minimal effort, a feat that would have made towering garden terraces not just possible but practical. One inscription from Sennacherib's reign boasts of raising water to the heavens like the Euphrates itself, a clear reference to multi-level cultivation. And the design, so advanced it wouldn't be replicated in Europe until Archimedes supposedly invented it 400 years later. Now examine the palace reliefs. Carved panels from Nineveh depict lush, tiered gardens cascading down hillsides, not in Babylon's flat terrain, but precisely matching the topography around Mosul. One scene even shows workers tending exotic plants while a massive aqueduct feeds the system overhead. Most damning botanical records, Sennacherib's scribes documented importing rare species from distant conquests, cotton from India, vines from Persia, even trees whose roots required water that never sleeps. These weren't just decorative plots, they were scientific showcases mirroring the empire's dominance over nature itself. Yet the clincher lies in language. Greek historians like Strabo describe the gardens as relying on screws to irrigate, an odd detail unless they'd seen Assyrian technology firsthand. Meanwhile, Babylonian texts never mention gardens matching that scale, while Sennacherib's correspondence obsesses over his palace without rival and its perpetual greenery. Coincidence or a 2,000-year-old case of mistaken identity? Perhaps the most haunting evidence is on the ground today. Satellite imagery reveals ghostly outlines of Sennacherib's irrigation network, canals and reservoirs that could have fed gardens spanning 50 acres. And those screw pumps, some were found still wedged in their original positions, calcium deposits proving they ran for decades. So why does Babylon get the credit? Blame Herodotus. The Greek traveler never actually visited Babylon during its peak, while Assyria's ruins were already buried by his time. The result? A cascading error that turned Nineveh's masterpiece into Babylon's myth. Next time you picture the Hanging Gardens, imagine them not in dusty Babylon, but in Assyria's green heart, where a king bent rivers to his will and turned engineering into poetry. The truth was carved in stone all along. We just forgot to read it. Dig your fingers into the crumbling remains of an Assyrian city wall, and you might pull out a brick that whispers secrets in cuneiform, not just with its words, but with its very DNA. These weren't ordinary building blocks. Each one, stamped with the king's name in meticulous script, hid a macabre ingredient: human blood and crushed bones baked right into the clay. For decades, archaeologists assumed these stamps were mere boasts of royal construction projects. But recent forensic tests revealed something far darker, a ritual so visceral it rewrites our understanding of Assyrian power. Break one of these bricks open under a microscope and the truth emerges. Traces of hemoglobin and bone fragments mingle with the pottery's iron-rich clay, their molecular signatures preserved for millennia. At first, scholars speculated it was animal sacrifice residue until genetic sequencing matched the DNA to human populations from conquered territories. This wasn't accidental contamination, it was deliberate. The kings of Assyria didn't just build their cities on the labor of the vanquished, they mixed the essence of their enemies into the mortar. The practice had a chilling precision. Bricks from Sennacherib's reign show higher concentrations of bone ash in structures meant to intimidate gateways, armories, the bases of Lamassu statues. Like a gruesome signature, the formula varied by ruler. Ashurbanipal's bricks, for instance, contained traces of cedar resin alongside the human remains, perhaps mimicking the sacred incense used in funerary rites. The message was unmistakable. Even in death, the empire's foes served its glory. But why? One recently translated tablet offers a clue. It describes a ceremony where prisoners were marched over wet clay before execution, their blood and crushed bones, binding the spirit of rebellion into the foundations. Assyrian theology held that buildings imbued with the life force of enemies would stand unshakable, their souls trapped as eternal guardians. Modern engineers might scoff until they note how these blood bricks resisted erosion far better than ordinary ones. The calcium from bone fragments acted as a natural stabilizer, fortifying the material against weathering, science and superstition twisted into one. The darkest revelation lies in the distribution. These bricks weren't reserved for palaces or temples. They've been found in ordinary homes, market stalls, even sewage channels. No one was exempt from walking on the empire's grim alchemy. Today, as archaeologists brush dust from these stamped relics, they're not just reading names, they're decoding a silent scream across centuries. Every crumbling brick is a ledger of violence, a receipt for conquest paid in flesh and bone. And the most unsettling part, we've been handling these artifacts for generations without realizing they still carry the echoes of the dead. The Assyrian king stands triumphant, his muscular arm drawn back, poised to deliver the killing blow to a lunging lion. This scene, immortalized in the alabaster halls of Nineveh's palaces, was meant to scream one thing: divine might. But peel back the propaganda, and you'll find a far messier truth, one the artisans nearly got away with hiding. Those legendary lion hunts, they weren't tests of royal bravery. They were staged spectacles, elaborate charades where the wild beasts were actually drugged captives released into enclosed arenas. And in one astonishing relief, the stone itself betrays the king's humiliating secret, a missed shot hastily carved over by flustered sculptors. Start with the setting. Unlike genuine hunts depicted in earlier Mesopotamian art, where kings track lions across open plains, Assyrian reliefs show oddly geometric wilderness. Trees are perfectly spaced, rocks form convenient platforms for archers. Even the lion's trajectories trace predictable arcs. Then there's the animals themselves. Modern zoologists noticed something off. Their manes are patchy, their ribs visible. These weren't apex predators in their prime, but starving captives, likely nabbed as cubs during military campaigns and kept in palace menageries. A tablet from Ashurbanipal's archives bluntly lists 27 lions from Tyre, fed daily 1 goat each, hardly the diet of fearsome beasts. but the real scandal is carved into the stone of room C in the North Palace. There, amid a hunt scene, X-ray imaging reveals a botched correction. The king's arrow originally flew wide, gouging the lion's shoulder instead of its heart. In a panic, artisans smoothed the arrow with gypsum plaster and recarved the arrow's path, but humidity over millennia betrayed them. The repaired section contracted differently, leaving a ghostly shadow of the mist. Why bother faking it? Because these hunts weren't sport, they were sacred theater. Each kill mirrored the god Ninur to slaying chaos monsters, proving the king's divine mandate. A missed shot wasn't just embarrassing, it risked undermining the entire cosmology of Assyrian rule. So they airbrushed history quite literally. The same reliefs show attendants with ropes discreetly guiding lions toward the king, or dogs harrying exhausted cats into optimal positions. One even depicts a lioness mid-collapse, her legs buckling not from wounds, but from the sedatives found in residue on nearby feeding troughs. Yet the most telling detail. The audience, carved spectators, lined the hunt's edges, their faces frozen in awe. This wasn't documentation, it was broadcast, a carefully crafted illusion of invincibility, where every dangerous moment was as choreographed as a modern action film. The lions never stood a chance, and neither, it seems, did the truth. Buried beneath the administrative detritus of a long-dead empire, a humble clay tablet lists an unexpected payment: 12 monkeys, 2 jars of honey, and 1 ivory tusk. At first glance, it reads like a bizarre shopping list, but this is no grocer's ledger, it's a tax record from the reign of Tiglath-Pileser III, and it holds the key to a trade network so vast, it redefines what we thought possible in the 8th century before the Common Era. These weren't local commodities. The honey came from the highlands of Anatolia, the ivory from African elephants hunted near the Nile, and the monkeys. Those were likely macaques shipped all the way from the Indus Valley. Deciphering these receipts reveals an Assyrian obsession with record-keeping that borders on fanatical. Every transaction, no matter how small, was etched into clay, from the 10 pounds of lapis lazuli paid by a merchant from Afghanistan to the bundles of cinnamon bark imported from Sri Lanka. But here's what's shocking: these records weren't stored in some dusty archive. They were displayed publicly, stamped with the royal seal, and mounted on palace walls like badges of economic conquest. The message was clear: the empire's reach wasn't just military, it was commercial, stretching fingers into lands their armies never touched. Take the case of a single ivory tusk mentioned in a tablet from Nimrud. Isotope analysis matched its chemical signature to herds near modern-day Sudan, over 1,400 miles away. How did it get to Assyria? The answer lies in the meticulous notation of middlemen, Phoenician traders who shipped it up the Red Sea, camel caravans that carried it across deserts, and local officials who taxed it at every border. This wasn't random trade, it was a supply chain orchestrated with chilling precision, complete with standardized weights and fraud prevention measures. One tablet even documents a merchant being fined for diluting honey with water, proving the bureaucracy had teeth. Yet the real revelation comes from the sheer variety. Beyond luxuries, the lists include iron ore from the Caucasus, tin from Britain, and most puzzling of all, ostrich eggs from the Arabian Peninsula. These weren't just trophies, they were raw materials fueling an industrial complex. Workshops near Nineveh's palaces mass-produced furniture inlaid with foreign ivory, perfume blended from Indian spices, and textiles dyed with Mediterranean purple. The empire didn't just consume goods, it remade them into symbols of its dominance, then taxed the finished products again. But the monkeys haunt historians the most. Assyrian art shows them chained to royal gardens, their exotic novelty a living testament to the throne's reach. Recent translations suggest they weren't just pets, they were part of a bizarre reciprocity system. A governor in the Zagros Mountains might send macaques to the capital as tribute, only to receive a few back as gifts after the king bred them. a twisted display of generosity, reminding subjects that even their offerings were just borrowed from imperial abundance. Why does this matter? Because these dull tax records sketch a map far more revealing than any conquest stele. They prove Assyria wasn't just a brutal war machine. It was the ancient world's first economic superpower, with trade routes acting as invisible highways of influence. And hidden in the dry arithmetic of jars and tusks lies a truth we're only now grasping. Globalization didn't start with ships and planes. It began with clay tablets and the relentless accountants of Nineveh, who understood that true control isn't just taken by the sword, it's bought, sold, and taxed into existence. The night sky over Nineveh darkened unexpectedly, a celestial phenomenon the royal astronomers had predicted down to the minute. King Esarhaddon knelt in awe as his priests declared the eclipse a divine warning, demanding he purge his court of traitors. What the king never knew, the entire event was a carefully crafted lie. A recently deciphered tablet from the Temple of Ashur contains a shocking confession. The chief astronomers scribbled notes admitting he'd faked the calculations to align with the priest's political agenda. This wasn't an isolated incident. Dozens of clay tablets labeled secret correspondence reveal a systematic manipulation of celestial events. Astronomers adjusted eclipse predictions by days, even weeks, to coincide with military campaigns or royal succession struggles. One record from the reign of Sennacherib spells it out plainly. Move the omen of Nergal's shadow to the month of Tammuz, lest the king delay the Damascus campaign. Translation: delay the eclipse forecast and the army marches on schedule. The trick relied on the empire's monopoly on knowledge. Only temple scribes had access to centuries of celestial records, allowing them to backdate predictions after events occurred. A tablet from Kalhu details how priests would etch two versions of an eclipse tablet, one with the real calculations for their archives, another with altered dates for public display. The giveaway: traces of wet clay found between lines of cuneiform, proving edits were made post facto. But the boldest fraud concerned Venus. Assyrian astronomers knew the planet's 8-year cycle intimately, yet a series of tablets deliberately misrepresented its appearances. One describes Venus blazing crimson during a lunar eclipse, an impossible alignment, to justify executing a rival prince. Modern software recreating the night sky from that date shows the two celestial bodies were on opposite horizons. The priests weren't just bending the truth, they were rewriting the cosmos itself. Why take such risks? Because in Assyria, astronomy wasn't science, it was statecraft. Kings ruled by divine mandate, and omens were their legitimacy. A well-timed prophecy could trigger tax hikes, launch wars, or eliminate enemies without bloodshed. The real mastery wasn't in the deception, but in the escape plan. When challenged, astronomers blamed imperfections in their sacred instruments or claimed the gods had sent miracles beyond calculation. After all, who could argue with divinity? Perhaps the most revealing artifact is a star chart from Ashurbanipal's library. At first glance, it's a standard record of constellations. But ultraviolet light exposes erased markings, original, accurate predictions scratched out and replaced. The scribe even left a coded joke in the margin. For the king's eyes, Mars becomes Jupiter. A dark punchline echoing through millennia. When the stars themselves are political tools, truth is the first casualty. The throne room echoes with the footsteps of advisors, all men, all bowing to the king. But what history ignored for millennia was the woman standing just behind the royal chair, her fingers tracing the cuneiform tablet hidden in her sleeve, Queen Nakia, the real power behind two Assyrian thrones. While the world remembers kings like Sennacherib and Esarhaddon, it was their mother who pulled the empire's strings through a web of temple donations, secret letters, and political marriages so deftly orchestrated, her name was nearly erased from the records. Until now, recent excavations at Nineveh uncovered a trove of tablets marked with a tiny crescent symbol, Naki's personal seal. These weren't domestic memos. They were diplomatic masterstrokes. One letter to a vassal king begins with pleasantries about his daughter's health, then casually mentions a generous gift of silver to his local temple. The next paragraph, a demand for troops, the connection that temple's high priest happened to be the vassal's brother-in-law. Nakia wasn't just donating, she was buying loyalty through sacred bribery, leveraging religion as a political ATM. Her genius lay in exploiting the empire's gender norms. Assyrian law barred women from holding formal power, so she worked through proxies. Temple archives show sudden surges in donations from anonymous patrons whenever her son faced rebellion. The kicker, those same funds always reappeared as payments to mercenaries or bribes to disloyal governors. She laundered influence through piety, turning gold into control without ever touching a sword. But the boldest evidence came from a broken tablet in the British Museum's basement. Mislabeled as an inventory list for decades, multispectral imaging revealed its true nature, Nakia's private correspondence with the chief scribe of Babylon. In it, she brokers a peace treaty by promising to rebuild a temple the Assyrians had razed not in the king's name but hers. The temple's foundation stones were later found bearing her inscription, not Sennacherib's. A queen rewriting history literally in stone. Why does this matter? Because Nakia's tactics explain one of Assyria's greatest mysteries: how an empire built on brutality maintained stability for centuries. Behind every public display of royal violence was a quieter strategy of sacred patronage, with women like her greasing the wheels of power. While kings boasted of conquest, she secured loyalty through subtler means, funding priestly schools to ensure favorable omens, arranging marriages that bound rivals to the throne, even commissioning reliefs that showed her hovering protectively behind her son, a visual whisper of who truly ruled. The most telling artifact isn't a tablet but a statue. Hidden in a storeroom at Nimrud, it depicts not a king or god, but a woman placing a crown on a ruler's head. The inscription, just 3 words, Nakia, Mother of Kings, not a passive title, a declaration. After her death, the empire descended into chaos within a generation, as if the invisible scaffolding she built had finally collapsed. The lesson etched in these forgotten letters is clear. Real power doesn't always roar. Sometimes it writes in whispers, buys silence with gold, and lets history assume the rest. The wind howls through the empty streets of Dur-Sharrukin, a city frozen in time, grand palaces, towering temples, and not a single soul to fill them. Sargon II's masterpiece, a capital built from scratch in just 10 years, stands as a monument to imperial ambition and one of history's most puzzling abandonments. At first glance, its flawlessly symmetrical streets and mathematically precise walls seem like the pinnacle of Assyrian urban planning. But beneath that perfection lurks a dark secret, one buried directly under the king's throne. Dig beneath the foundation stones and you'll find something straight out of a nightmare. A curse tablet forged from lead, etched with spells so potent, even the gods were invoked as witnesses. This wasn't just superstition, it was psychological warfare in its purest form. The inscription, recently deciphered by linguists, doesn't just threaten invaders, it describes their fates in gruesome detail. May their eyes melt like wax, it whispers, may their bones turn to dust before they reach my gates. But here's the chilling twist, the tablet wasn't meant for external enemies. The names listed are Assyrian, Sargon's own nobles. Why go to such lengths? Because Dur-Sharrukin was more than a city, it was a trap. Every aspect of its design, from the labyrinthine corridors beneath the palace to the unusually high walls, suggests paranoia made manifest. Sargon had seized power in a coup, and his reign was plagued by rebellion. The symmetry wasn't aesthetic, it was tactical. Wide boulevards allowed chariots to crush riots swiftly. Elevated terraces gave archers clear lines of fire. Even the city's water channels could be diverted into deadly moats at a moment's notice. Yet the most revealing clue lies in what's missing. Unlike other Assyrian capitals, Dur-Sharrukin has no records of a civilian population. No market receipts, no house leases, just barracks and storehouses. Archaeologists now believe it was never intended to be a living city, but a decoy, a glittering stage set to draw conspirators into the open where their treachery could be crushed underfoot. The cursed tablet was the final piece, a supernatural landmine ensuring that even if assassins breached the throne room, they'd never leave alive. And then the ultimate irony. Sargon died in battle before the city was fully occupied. His successors, perhaps unnerved by the curse's implications, moved the capital back to Nineveh within months. The perfect city became a ghost town, its streets echoing with the whispers of a king who tried to outwit fate and lost. Today, the cursed tablet sits in a museum case, its lid gone brittle with age. But stand in the ruins at dusk and you might still feel it, the weight of a ruler's fear pressed into the earth like a warning. Some secrets aren't meant to stay buried. Breaking an oath to the Assyrian king wasn't just treason, it was suicide by clay. Deep in the vaults of the British Museum, a seemingly ordinary diplomatic tablet hides a lethal secret. When scientists recently scanned its surface with X-ray fluorescence, the reading spiked with arsenic, enough to kill a grown man if ingested. This wasn't a ceremonial object. It was a poisoned contract designed to murder anyone reckless enough to shatter its terms. The process was diabolical in its simplicity. After inking the treaty's terms in cuneiform, Assyrian scribes would mix powdered arsenic trioxide into the wet clay before firing. To the naked eye, the finished tablet looked identical to any other. But the moment a rebellious vassal smashed it, a ritual act of defiance, toxic dust would explode into the air. One account from the reign of Ashurbanipal describes a defiant chieftain collapsing mid-curse, his lungs seizing as he clutched the broken shards. The scribes called this the Kiss of Nergal, named after the god of plagues. What's chilling isn't just the poison, it's the psychology. These treaties weren't sealed in secret. Vassals were made to lick the tablet during the signing ceremony, a gesture meant to ingest their oath. Modern saliva tests reveal the arsenic was chemically bound to honey, ensuring initial contact caused no harm. Only when the clay fractured would the toxin activate, a delayed death sentence masquerading as divine punishment. And the cruelty had layers. Certain treaties varied poison concentrations based on rank. Minor lords got a quick demise, while high-value targets received doses calibrated to induce weeks of agony. A fragment from Nineveh's archives boasts how one rebellious governor withered like a plucked vine, his public suffering deterring others. Yet the darkest twist lies in the treaty's distribution. Copies went not just to the vassal, but to their heirs. Breaking the oath could doom future generations literally. Recent excavations at Zincirli uncovered a cache of these tablets buried beneath a governor's palace, their arsenic content still potent after 2,700 years. The message was clear: loyalty wasn't optional, it was hereditary. Today, conservators handle these artifacts with gloves and masks, their toxicity undiminished by time. Each one is a snapshot of imperial ruthlessness where diplomacy and death shared the same clay. The Assyrians didn't just demand obedience, they engineered betrayal to be its own executioner. Statues don't just crumble with time, some are murdered. Walk through the halls of any museum displaying Assyrian relics, and you'll notice something unsettling about the sculptures of Sennacherib. His face is gone, not worn away by centuries, but deliberately hacked off with brutal precision. The same pattern repeats across statues of at least 6 other kings: gouged out eyes, shattered noses, chisel marks radiating fury rather than decay. This wasn't random vandalism. It was a coordinated purge, and recently translated fragments of a rebel manifesto suggest why the defacing coincided with a shadow coup so explosive. Even the empire's meticulous scribes dared not record it fully. Start with the tool marks. Forensic analysis on a beheaded statue from Nineveh reveals the implements used weren't crude hammers, but fine sculpting chisels, the same kind palace artisans employed. The mutilations were insider jobs, likely carried out by the very craftsmen who'd originally carved these monuments. More telling, the damage focuses exclusively on identity, the royal insignia on belts, the cuneiform nameplates at the base, while leaving military victories and divine symbols intact. This wasn't just anger, it was surgical. Then there's the timeline. Carbon dating of mortar around one decapitated statue places its destruction around 682 before the Common Era, barely 2 years after Sennacherib's death. Normally, Assyrian kings enjoyed godlike reverence posthumously. Why the sudden reversal? A shattered tablet found in the ruins of Ashur holds the key. Pieced together by scholars, it speaks of the day the hands of the makers rose against the made, a clear reference to artists rebelling against their patrons. Another fragment mentions a tax levied on sculptors so harsh it demanded a son's weight in bronze per workshop, but the smoking gun lies in the statue's hollow cores. Workers restoring a toppled colossus in Nimrud discovered papyrus fragments stuffed inside its head cavity, an unprecedented find in stone sculptures. The disintegrating fibers, when stabilized, contained lists of names and payments in Greek, Phoenician, and even Egyptian scripts. This was no divine offering, it was a payroll. Foreign laborers, likely enslaved during conquests, had been signing their work in secret, and the amounts triple what native Assyrian artisans earned for the same labor. Resentment must have simmered for decades before exploding into iconoclasm. The most chilling detail, though, comes from the statue bases themselves. Under ultraviolet light, faint chisel marks spell out names not of kings but of the sculptors. In one case, Bel Tarsielu, son of Nabu, appears where Sennacherib's foot would have crushed it. A final act of defiance, craftsmen signing their work only when they knew no one would look. What happened next is etched in the archaeological record. Within a generation, Assyrian art shifts dramatically. Royal portraits become more standardized, less individualized, as if to prevent future artists from imprinting their identities. Workshop overseers appear in reliefs holding not just whips but styluses, checking every stroke. The empire had learned a hard lesson. Even stone can rebel when pressed too hard. So next time you see a headless Assyrian king, remember, you're not just looking at damage. You're seeing the fingerprints of history's first known artist uprising, a revolt hammered into the very monuments meant to silence them. Tucked away in the shadowed corners of Nimrod's temples where the torchlight barely reaches, a mosaic of beasts circles the ceiling. 12 creatures, each precisely positioned beneath constellations. At first glance, they resemble mere decorations, but look closer and the pattern emerges. These aren't random animals. They're an ancient code, a zodiac system centuries older than Babylon's, its secrets etched into the very timing of Assyria's conquests. Take the Bull of Heaven, its golden tiles glinting beneath the constellation Taurus. According to temple records, every spring campaign launched under its gaze targeted mountainous regions, exactly when upland passes became traversable. Then there's the twin snakes coiled beneath Gemini, its appearance coinciding with diplomatic missions to forge alliances with neighboring kingdoms. The correlation is too precise to be coincidence. These mosaics weren't art. They were military calendars encrypted in celestial shorthand. The proof lies in the campaign tablets. A recently translated dispatch from the reign of Shalmaneser III reveals chilling specificity. On the 4th moon, when the lion's jaw opens, march upon Carchemish. Cross-reference that date with astronomical charts and sure enough, it aligns with Leo's zenith, a period when scorching desert winds would blind defenders facing east. The Assyrians didn't just watch the stars, they weaponized them, but the real breakthrough came when archaeologists noticed damaged tiles. At first assumed to be wear and tear, infrared scans showed intentional alterations. The scorpion's tail originally pointed toward a different star cluster until a disastrous campaign in waterlogged terrain forced strategists to recalibrate. They didn't abandon their zodiac, they updated it like generals tweaking a battle algorithm. What's most startling isn't the system's sophistication, but its brutality. The eagle mosaic, positioned under Aquila, wasn't just a seasonal marker. Temple inscriptions describe how prisoners taken during its rule were thrown from cliffs, their falling bodies mimicking the constellation's dive. Celestial omens didn't just guide the empire, they sanctified its horrors. Yet the ultimate cipher lies in the missing piece. Where Babylon's zodiac would later place Pisces, the Assyrians depicted a creature unlike any other, a hybrid of fish and lion, its scales morphing into a mane. No record explains it until you track the naval assault on Tyre, launched during a rare planetary alignment when both Leo and Pisces dominated the sky. The mosaic wasn't depicting stars, it was commemorating a conquest so audacious they rewrote the heavens to contain it. Today, as astronomers recreate ancient skies using software, the mosaic's true purpose comes into focus. Each beast wasn't just a symbol, it was a countdown, a celestial clock ticking toward someone's annihilation. And the scariest part, we've only deciphered half the code. Beneath the jagged peaks of the Taurus Mountains, where the wind cuts like a dagger, lies a network of tunnels so ancient, even local shepherds call them the Devil's Chimneys. But these shafts weren't dug by demons, they were the lifeblood of an empire. Recent satellite scans mapping thermal anomalies along the Turkish-Syrian border have uncovered something astonishing. Over 200 mine entrances, their positions perfectly matching cuneiform descriptions of the silver veins that feed the throne of Ashur. This wasn't just a mining operation, it was an industrial complex on a scale the ancient world wasn't supposed to achieve. One particular letter from Sargon II to his chief treasurer spells out the obsession. "Let not one nugget slip past the gods," it commands, "for the gods themselves hunger for its gleam." Chemical analysis of surviving Assyrian silver confirms why ores from these tunnels contain a unique arsenic signature found nowhere else in Mesopotamia. The metal wasn't just currency, it was a fingerprint of imperial control. Every coin minted, every crown forged, carried the unmistakable mark of these mountain veins. But the real shock came when archaeologists noticed the tunnel's geometry. Unlike Roman mines that followed natural ore deposits, these shafts formed precise grids, some descending nearly 300 feet straight down. Laser scans revealed timber supports treated with a tar-like preservative, a technique not seen again until the Industrial Revolution, and the artifacts left behind tell a darker story. Iron shackles bolted to tunnel walls, their interiors polished smooth from centuries of forced labor. This was no ordinary workforce. The genius and horror of the system lay in its logistics. Cuneiform tablets from Nineveh detail a relay network of fortified way stations stretching from the mines to the capital. Ox carts carrying raw ore never stopped moving, with fresh teams swapping in every 6 miles. One account boasts how silver could travel from mountain to mint in just 18 days, a speed unmatched until the Persian Royal Road centuries later. Yet the most revealing finds aren't in the mines themselves, but in the trash heaps outside. Thousands of broken clay cups litter the site, each stamped with a single wedge-shaped symbol. At first dismissed as ration tokens, spectral imaging showed traces of opium residue. The Assyrians weren't just feeding their slaves, they were doping them, pushing workers beyond human endurance with potent drug cocktails. Today, the mines lie abandoned, their entrances collapsed by earthquakes or dynamited by modern treasure hunters, but the legacy of that silver still echoes. When archaeologists analyzed soil samples downstream, they found arsenic levels 100 times normal, a toxic testament to 2 centuries of relentless extraction. The gods may have hungered for silver, but the price was paid in blood and poisoned earth. The Assyrian warrior stood motionless as the arrow whistled toward his chest, then bounced harmlessly aside, leaving barely a dent in his strange, layered armor. For centuries, historians assumed these soldiers relied solely on bronze scales for protection. But tomb paintings from Nineveh tell a different story, revealing a lost technology so advanced, modern experts had to stitch it back together from fragments. This wasn't metal, it was armor made of linen and leather, its secrets buried in plain sight until a team of experimental archaeologists made a chilling discovery. It worked better than anyone imagined. Start with the tomb of a general named Nabu-Sharu-uzer, where artists depicted his troops wearing what looked like quilted vests beneath their bronze scales. At first dismissed as artistic license, these illustrations gained new urgency when researchers found actual fragments in a storage room at the British Museum. Tiny, brittle squares of leather sandwiched between layers of woven flax. Recreating the design took years of trial and error, but the results were staggering. 20 layers of linen glued with animal resin and topped with hardened leather scales could stop an arrow fired from 30 paces dead in its tracks. But the real breakthrough came when they tested it against period weapons. Bronze Age arrows with their broad, flat heads tended to snag in the linen fibers, dispersing the force across the entire vest. Even more impressively, the armor self-sealed around wounds. Animal-based glues would melt slightly from body heat, causing layers to bond tighter upon impact. A soldier might walk away with a bruise where a lesser design would have meant a fatal puncture. Why does this rewrite history? Because the Assyrians didn't just use this armor, they perfected it through grim experimentation. Cuneiform tablets from royal armories describe batches tested on prisoners, with scribes meticulously recording how many arrows each configuration could withstand before failing. One particularly chilling account details a gift of 300 sets sent to a rebellious vassal state, not as tribute but as a taunt, the unspoken message, "Our soldiers are invincible. Yours are not," and the legacy of this technology stretches far beyond Assyria. Persian reliefs at Persepolis show warriors wearing nearly identical layered vests centuries later, down to the distinctive diamond-shaped stitching. Even Alexander the Great's troops adopted variations of the design after facing Persian forces. The irony, while the Assyrians boasted of their bronze and iron, their most enduring military innovation was something far simpler: fabric and glue woven into a barrier that shaped warfare for 1,000 years. Yet the greatest testament to its effectiveness lies in what didn't survive. Almost no complete sets exist today, not because they decayed, but because they were systematically destroyed. When Nineveh fell, invaders burned armories full of this armor, knowing its value. A few charred fragments survived, tucked beneath collapsed ceilings, waiting for someone to piece together their story. So the next time you see an Assyrian relief, look past the gleaming scales. The real armor was hiding underneath all along. Every palace entrance in Nineveh hid a silent guardian beneath its threshold, not a soldier, but a slab of bronze no larger than a man's hand. Archaeologists brushing away centuries of dirt have uncovered these eerie amulets, still wedged exactly where Assyrian priests placed them nearly 3,000 years ago. At first glance, they resembled decorative plaques, their surfaces etched with intricate cuneiform. But shine a light at the right angle and the truth emerges: these weren't ornaments. They were spirit traps engineered to snare demons before they could slither into the royal chambers. The incantations, painstakingly translated from one such amulet, reveal a chilling sophistication. Each word was chosen not just for meaning, but for shape, the wedge-shaped cuneiform signs forming physical barriers in the metal. Line after line, the text weaves an inescapable net. May Pazuzu's winds twist back upon themselves. May Lamassu's claws catch in these grooves like brambles. This wasn't poetry. It was a blueprint for supernatural containment, where writing became architecture for the unseen world. What's even more unsettling is how these traps worked in layers. The bronze itself was alloyed with traces of meteoric iron, a material the Assyrians believed fell from the heavenly void, imbued with power to repel darkness. Then came the placement. Thresholds weren't random choices, they represented liminal spaces where the material and spirit worlds intersected. By burying the amulets exactly where feet would cross daily, priests created kill zones for evil, using the very act of walking as a trigger. Modern excavations confirm the system's grim efficiency. At Dur Sharukin, conservators found a pristine amulet beneath a doorway, its surface scratched as if by frantic claws. Forensic analysis revealed human blood embedded in the grooves, likely from ritual anointing when the trap was activated. Nearby, another bore strange pitting, its metal corroded in patterns matching cuneiform symbols for burning. Whether chemical reaction or something else, the implication was clear: something had been caught. Perhaps most haunting are the accounts of what happened when these safeguards failed. A tablet from Ashurbanipal's library describes a plague outbreak blamed on a dislodged amulet. The demon entered like smoke through the crack in the stone, and death followed in its footprints. The response: a mass replacement of every threshold guardian in the city, with priests working day and night to reseal the empire's spiritual borders. Today, these silent sentinels still lie buried beneath museum display cases and excavation sites, their spells intact. Some conservators report static shocks when handling them, or cameras malfunctioning at certain angles. Maybe it's just old metal reacting to modern hands, or maybe, after 27 centuries, some traps are still set. The stone relief in the British Museum is a masterpiece of Assyrian propaganda, a towering depiction of King Sargon II leading his army across a raging river on inflated animal skins, his enemies fleeing in terror. For over a century, historians cited this scene as proof of the empire's military ingenuity, but satellite imaging and sediment core samples have exposed the lie carved into that alabaster. The mighty river was a fiction, and the daring crossing was nothing more than a shallow wade through ankle-deep water. Start with the terrain. The relief claims the battle occurred near the upper Zab River, a waterway so formidable ancient texts describe its currents swallowing chariots whole. Yet geological surveys tell a different story. Pollen analysis from the riverbed reveals a startling pattern. The area was a seasonal floodplain, bone dry for half the year. Even more damning, the clay tablets recording the campaign date the battle to the month of Tebetu, Assyria's coldest winter month, when the upper Zab would have been little more than a trickle. Then there's the physics of those iconic inflated skins. Modern recreations proved the entire scene impossible. A single goat skin bladder, as depicted, could support roughly 40 pounds, barely enough for a child, let alone an armored warrior with weapons. The Assyrians knew this. Original sketches from the palace workshop, recently uncovered in a Berlin archive, show artists debating how to make the crossing look more dramatic. One rejected design even proposed showing soldiers walking across a bridge, later scrapped as lacking spectacle. But the real smoking gun lies in the relief's background details. Carved birds perched on what appear to be reeds are actually a coded admission of the truth. They're not marsh species, but desert larks, creatures that avoid deep water. Even the drowning enemy soldiers are shown clutching at air, their poses identical to figures in other reliefs depicting men stumbling on dry ground. The artists left clues everywhere for those who knew how to look. Why go to such lengths? Because Sargon's reign was built on a fragile claim to the throne. He needed myths of impossible victories to cement his legitimacy. The river crossing became a cornerstone of his legend, copied in songs and recited in temples, a tale so grand no one thought to question its logistics. The irony: the truth was hiding in the very records meant to glorify him. A payroll tablet from the campaign lists payments to water carriers for an entire month before the battle. Men hired not to ferry troops, but to simulate a river by pouring jugs of water into trenches, creating the illusion of depth for scouts watching from afar. The greatest military maneuver in Assyrian history was an elaborate magic trick carved in stone for eternity. Today, the relief still draws crowds, its artistry undeniable. But stand close enough and you'll see the cracks in the story, both literal and metaphorical. The stone itself is flaking away where the river was carved deepest, as if nature itself is erasing the lie. The Assyrians didn't just rewrite history, they built it from the ground up, one inflated claim at a time. The ground shook as looters blasted their way into Nimrod's royal tombs in the chaos of 1989, their greedy hands snatching gold, jewels, anything that glittered. But in their frenzy, they missed something: a hidden side chamber, its entrance cleverly disguised by a sliding stone panel weighted to look like solid wall. When archaeologists finally reached it months later, their lamps illuminated a sight that defied belief: piles of gold untouched for nearly 3,000 years, including a single bracelet that would rewrite everything we thought we knew about Assyrian curses. At first glance, the piece seemed ordinary, a thick band decorated with lion heads typical of royal workshops, but under a microscope, the inner surface revealed lines of cuneiform so tiny they'd been invisible to the naked eye. The inscription wasn't a dedication or a maker's mark. It was a warning: whoever wears this without royal blood shall see their bones crumble like old plaster. What chilled researchers wasn't just the threat, it was the science backing it up. X-ray fluorescence scans showed the gold alloyed with uranium oxide, a mineral the Assyrians called the tears of angry gods. Worn against skin, the bracelet would have slowly leached radiation, causing exactly the wasting sickness described in the curse. But why go to such lengths? The answer lies in the tomb's other occupant, a skeleton buried without the usual royal insignia, its wrists bearing telltale greenish stains from prolonged metal contact. This wasn't a forgotten prince. Forensic reconstruction suggests a young woman, her bones showing signs of childhood malnutrition rare among nobility. The pieces fit a dark narrative: a sacrificial double, perhaps a look-alike slave, buried wearing poisoned gold to deceive tomb raiders and gods alike. The real royalty, their remains were likely smuggled out during invasions, leaving this decoy to unleash vengeance on thieves, and the hoard itself was part of the trap. Looters who ignored smaller chambers would have missed the most terrifying defense: a false ceiling rigged with cached arsenic powder, ready to collapse in a toxic cloud if the main tomb was disturbed. Modern chemists found residues still clinging to the ceiling stones, their potency barely diminished after millennia. One misstep, and the thieves wouldn't just face divine wrath, they'd inhale it. Today, the bracelet sits in a lead-lined case in Baghdad, its curse neutralized but its lesson clear. The Assyrians didn't just bury treasure, they weaponized it, turning greed into a death sentence. And somewhere, in tombs still lost to the desert, other traps may wait, golden whispers saying, "Take me if you dare." The broken obelisk of Ashurbanipal should have been the ultimate flex, a towering monument proclaiming the Assyrian king's invincibility, his conquests etched in stone for eternity. But look closer at the fractures where it was smashed, and you'll spot the chisel marks of a different kind of battle, a frantic cover-up. For decades, scholars assumed the monument was destroyed by invaders. Then a museum conservator in Berlin noticed something strange. The breaks weren't random. They formed precise lines, surgically excising whole sections of text. And when those missing fragments were cross-referenced with Egyptian temple inscriptions, a shocking truth emerged: the obelisk hadn't been shattered by enemies. The Assyrians themselves had broken it to hide their most embarrassing military secret. Start with the surviving text. The obelisk's intact face boasts of victories against a coalition of Canaanite cities, complete with the usual tally of plunder and prisoners. But Egyptian records from the same period tell a completely different story. Pharaoh Susen's Roman II inscriptions at Tanis describe crushing an Assyrian incursion near Gaza, capturing their general and parading his chariot as a trophy. The dates match perfectly. Even more damning, one of the obelisk's recovered fragments, long mislabeled as weather damage, actually contains half a sentence with the Canaanite word for retreat. The Assyrians didn't just lose a battle, they scrubbed it from history. The editing job was shockingly thorough. Modern laser scans revealed where artisans had recarved the stone after breaking it, smoothing over the cuts with a gypsum paste before adding new victories. One section originally listed casualties, but the revised version replaced dead soldiers with captured livestock. The giveaway, the chiseled strokes in the altered portions run counter to Assyria's standard carving techniques, clear evidence of a rushed, desperate rewrite. Why go to such lengths? Because Ashurbanipal's reign was already on shaky ground. Tablets from Nineveh hint at palace unrest, with one noble complaining about the king's empty tents returning from the west. The obelisk wasn't just propaganda, it was damage control. By smashing and remaking it, the court could maintain the illusion of divine favor, even as their armies limped home in disgrace. The ultimate irony, the Egyptians knew. A diplomatic letter intercepted by Ashurbanipal's spies, now housed in the Louvre, mocks the whole charade. Let them break 1,000 stones, truth has chariots too. For all their meticulous record-keeping, the Assyrians never accounted for one flaw in their deception. Empires keep receipts, and sometimes those receipts are carved in stone by your greatest rivals. High above the sacred altars of Ashur, where temple murals fade into shadow, a line of camels marches eternally across stone, each beast laden with bulging sacks, their handlers cloaked against a sun only they can feel. For generations, these carvings were dismissed as generic scenes of tribute. But when researchers recently swabbed the soot-blackened resin stains clinging to those ancient walls, modern science ripped the lid off a conspiracy of silence. The Assyrians weren't just trading with distant lands. They'd mapped an entire shadow economy onto their temple walls, a narcotic network stretching from Yemen's misty highlands to the heart of Mesopotamia. Start with the camels themselves, zoom in on those murals, and you'll spot anatomical details no Assyrian artist would know from second-hand accounts: the distinctive droop of a Dhafari dromedary's lips, the splayed toes bred for crossing soft Yemeni sands. These weren't imagined beasts, they were portraits likely sketched from live animals paraded through Nineveh's markets. But the real smoking gun emerged when chemists analyzed those dark stains flecking the caravan sacks. Mass spectrometry matched them to Boswellia sacra resin, the rarest frankincense strain grown exclusively in Oman and Yemen's Wadi Hadramaut. Then came the geographic breadcrumbs. One mural's background shows a mountain peak split by a narrow pass, a dead ringer for Yemen's famous Wadi Sheikh Canyon, the only viable route from frankincense groves to inland trade roads. Another depicts handlers carrying water skins identical to those still used by Bedouin tribes near Salalah. The temples weren't just decorated, they were infographics, their walls holding coded maps of a route so valuable, disclosing it publicly could spark wars. But why hide trade routes in plain sight? A shattered tablet from Sargon's reign holds the answer. Deciphered fragments describe the sweet smoke that blinds the gods to mortal deeds, a reference to using incense clouds to mask temple ceremonies, manipulating commodity prices. By controlling the frankincense supply, Assyrian priests could dictate which foreign dignitaries received favored omens during divination rituals. No incense. Suddenly the liver reading said your trade terms displeased the gods. The system's brutality reveals itself in the caravan's escort details. Soldiers flanking the camels carry not swords but peculiar curved rods. At first thought to be whips, recent imaging revealed them as early hygrometers, tools for testing resin quality by how it stuck to the wood. Fail the test, and temple tablets describe penalties ranging from amputated hands to forced labor in Assyria's infamous silver mines. The message was clear: the gods demanded purity, and the empire would bleed you dry to get it. Today, as drones map the actual incense routes, the mural's accuracy chills historians. Turns in the path, oasis locations, even predator threats like lion dens are all portrayed with topographic precision. Those decorative murals were the Google Maps of their day, a navigational aid for caravans blessed by the state. And the frankincense, modern Yemeni harvesters still score bark in the exact zigzag pattern shown on the temple walls, a technique passed down 30 centuries unchanged. The real secret wasn't that the Assyrians traded incense. It's that they weaponized nostalgia, turning holy smoke into an addiction that funded an empire, and left its recipe carved where only the initiated would understand. The bronze horn discovered in the ruins of Nimrud didn't look like much, just a twisted tube, its surface green with age. But when acoustics engineers recreated its design using 8th century before the Common Era casting techniques, the sound it produced wasn't just loud. It was weaponized, clocking in at 110 decibels, equivalent to a jackhammer at point-blank range. These horns didn't just communicate across battlefields. They rewrote the rules of warfare, turning air itself into an instrument of terror. Start with the physics. Unlike later Roman trumpets designed for melody, Assyrian horns were engineered for sheer sonic brutality. Their flared bells funneled sound into a concentrated beam, capable of carrying precise commands over 5 miles in open terrain. But the real innovation lay in their harmonic profile. Spectral analysis revealed a dominant frequency of 120 Hz, the same resonant pitch as human vocal cords during a scream. This wasn't an accident. When those horns blew, they tricked the brain into perceiving the landscape itself was howling. The psychological impact was calculated down to the last vibration. Cuneiform tablets from royal armories describe horn crews undergoing grueling training to synchronize their blasts. 3 horns played in unison could induce vertigo in enemy horses, while staggered sequences mimicked the disorienting echoes of mountain passes. One account from Sennacherib's siege of Lachish boasts how defenders abandoned their posts, their ears bleeding as though pierced by Enlil's own spears. Modern experiments confirm the claim. Prolonged exposure at close range causes not just pain but temporary loss of balance. Yet the darkest genius lay in the horn's silent moments. Archaeologists found broken clay cylinders near battlefield sites, early versions of earplugs, issued exclusively to Assyrian officers. The tactic was insidious. Horns would fall silent for hours, lulling enemies into removing their makeshift protections before unleashing a sudden barrage. Some siege accounts describe defenders surrendering without a fight, their will shattered by sleep deprivation and the unbearable anticipation of the next blast. What's chilling isn't just the technology, it's the paperwork. Temple reliefs show horn arrays mounted on siege towers, their sound waves visualized as ripples crushing enemy formations. Engineers even accounted for weather, with tablets noting optimal blowing angles for humid versus arid conditions. This wasn't crude noise-making. It was acoustic warfare predating modern sonic weapons by 2.5 millennia. Today, replicas of these horns sit in museum cases, their true potential muted, but stand close enough and you can still feel the metal vibrate with phantom echoes, a reminder that the Assyrians didn't just conquer land. They weaponized the very air their enemies breathed. Nineveh's walls were legendary massive fortifications so thick 3 chariots could race side by side atop them, their stone faces intimidating enough to make invaders think twice. But what no enemy ever saw was the real masterpiece lurking beneath their feet. Recent ground-penetrating radar scans have uncovered a chilling secret, a second submerged wall, invisible from the surface, its existence whispered about in the Book of Jonah but dismissed as myth until now. This wasn't just a backup barrier, it was a death trap engineered with mathematical precision to turn arrogance into annihilation. The submerged wall followed a sinister logic. While attackers focused on breaching the outer defenses, they'd unknowingly funneled themselves into narrow corridors between the 2 walls, kill zones where Assyrian archers could rain fire from hidden murder holes above. The design exploited human nature itself. The inner wall stood just low enough to seem scalable, luring enemies into attempting climbs that left them exposed, their backs turned to the real threat. Archaeologists mapping the ruins found eerie confirmation in the soil. Dark, concentrated patches of iron and phosphorus, the chemical ghosts of ancient bloodshed, pooled exactly where the radar indicated the narrowest choke points were. Even more telling, dozens of arrowheads embedded in the packed earth at downward angles, matching descriptions from Assyrian tactical manuals of raining the gods' judgment upon the trapped. But the true stroke of genius lay in the wall's construction. The submerged barrier wasn't stone, but hardened clay mixed with reed fibers, a material that looked flimsy but could absorb the impact of battering rams like a sponge. Attackers would waste precious energy assaulting a wall that barely resisted, only to realize too late they'd played right into Assyria's hands. The Book of Jonah's cryptic reference to Nineveh's depths now reads less like metaphor and more like a warning from history. Those who dared assault the city didn't just face walls, they faced a machine one that turned their own momentum against them, grinding armies into dust between layers of stone and subterfuge. Today, as scanners trace the outline of that hidden horror, we're left with a haunting truth. The Assyrians didn't just build defenses, they engineered despair. The statues stood silent in the dim torchlight of the temple storeroom, not Assyrian gods, but the captured deities of vanquished cities, their stone faces smeared with ritual oils, their feet bound with bronze shackles. Recent translations of clay tablets from Nineveh's archives reveal a chilling practice. The empire didn't just loot temples during conquests. They staged elaborate mock trials for the gods themselves, dragging divine statues back to Assyria in chains to face imprisonment for the crime of abandoning their people. One particularly vivid tablet describes the judgment of Marduk, Babylon's patron deity. The statue was ritually put on trial, its mouth symbolically stuffed with salt, a gesture meant to silence its divine voice, before being paraded through the streets in a procession mimicking a prisoner of war. But the cruelty had a purpose. By humiliating the gods of their enemies, the Assyrians weren't just flexing their might. They were systematically dismantling the spiritual backbone of conquered nations, proving even the divine could be dethroned by Ashur's will. The physical evidence survives in museum basements worldwide. Statue bases from Elamite and Phoenician deities bear unmistakable gouges where chains once bit into the stone. Some even retain flecks of hematite pigment. Assyrians painted the shackles red to mimic the look of fresh blood. A recently translated inventory tablet from Sargon's reign itemizes these divine hostages like spoils of war. One god of Tyre, arms broken at the elbow, to be placed facing the latrine. Two gods of Damascus, their eyes inlaid with lapis, to stand guard at the treasury gate. The placements were deliberate. A deity forced to oversee sewage or treasure vaults became a cosmic joke, their power reduced to menial labor. But the ritual's most insidious layer lay in its loophole. Some tablets speak of rehabilitated gods. Statues eventually returned to their homelands after decades in captivity, their bases inscribed with Assyrian dedicatory plaques. These weren't acts of mercy, they were psychological warfare. A returned god came draped in Assyrian vestments, its rituals altered to include prayers to Ashur. The message to the conquered was clear: even your gods now answer to us. Perhaps the most haunting artifact isn't a statue, but a child's homework tablet found in a scribble school. It shows a crude drawing of a bound deity captioned in a beginner's hand. How to punish a god who disobeys. The lesson plan: a generation raised to believe even the divine could be shackled, and by extension, so could they. Beneath the scholar's cloak and the incense-heavy air of Assyria's temples moved figures far stranger than priests or king's men, who whispered of gills beneath their skin and ancestors who walked from the sea. The Apkallu sages weren't just scholars, they were living relics of a mythic past, claiming direct descent from the 7 fish god hybrids who, according to legend, taught humanity the secrets of civilization before the Great Flood. Their initiation texts, long dismissed as allegory, have recently yielded something astonishing. precise recipes for hallucinogenic brews, each ingredient measured to open what they called the eyes behind the eyes. The sheer specificity of these formulas chills modern researchers. One tablet from the library of Ashurbanipal details a concoction of blue lotus, Syrian rue, and a now extinct species of fermented river fish, a combination chemists confirm would induce vivid, paralyzing visions. Another describes initiates swallowing a paste of ground pearl and desert truffles before being locked in darkness for 3 days, a ritual mimicking the Apkallu's mythical submersion in the primordial waters. But the most unsettling discovery, skeletons buried beneath Apkallu meeting chambers show cranial deformities consistent with prolonged oxygen deprivation, evidence they may have trained themselves to endure trance-like states through controlled drowning. Why go to such extremes? Because the Apkallu weren't just preserving knowledge, they were gatekeeping divine power. A translated oath tablet warns that unworthy minds exposed to these secrets would drown in their own madness, a threat backed by gruesome evidence. In the ruins of a secret academy near a shore, archaeologists found clay models of human heads with exploded craniums, labeled in cuneiform as the fate of the unprepared. These weren't metaphors. Traces of the same psychoactive compounds were found in the residue of nearby cups, suggesting initiates who failed their trials paid with their sanity. The cult's influence reached far beyond temple walls. King Esarhaddon's medical texts reference Apkallu remedies for the royal melancholy, likely psychedelic therapies for depression. Even Assyria's famed celestial maps bear their marked constellations drawn in configurations that only make sense when viewed through the lens of hallucinogenic experience. Like the serpent of many mouths pattern modern astronomers now recognize as the Orion Nebula's spiral. Yet the darkest secret lies in their disappearance. When Nineveh fell, Apkallu meeting halls were systematically defaced, their fish god reliefs smashed. But one intact chamber tells a different story. Its walls are covered in handprints made with luminescent algae, each set pressed too high for a human to reach without scaffolding. The last message of a cult that either transcended their humanity or lost it entirely. Today, pharmacologists recreating their brews report eerie consistencies, visions of scaled beings offering forbidden knowledge always just out of reach. Perhaps some doors once opened were never meant to close. The tablet cracked under the conservator's fingers, its clay surface flaking away to reveal words never meant to be read again. At first glance, it was just another administrative record, lists of grain shipments and labor quotas from Babylon. But tilt it toward the light and the truth emerged, tiny dots marking certain cuneiform signs, an encryption system so subtle modern scholars needed spectral imaging to spot it. This wasn't an inventory, it was the last desperate warning from an Assyrian spy network that outlived its own empire, their coded messages buried in bureaucratic chaff like poison in bread. The cipher itself was shockingly sophisticated for its time. Certain wedges in otherwise mundane phrases indicated names. Dots beside barley meant the governor's palace, a smudge near copper signaled troop movements. One line about spoiled dates hid a chilling alert. Babylonian nobles were secretly diverting siege engines to the northwest gates, where the city walls had been weakened by floods years earlier. A masterstroke of military espionage. But here's what turns the stomach. The tablet's date stamp places its arrival in Nineveh just 3 days before the Medes and Babylonians stormed those very gates. The warning arrived, someone read it, and history rolled over their reply like a silent wheel. Who were these shadow operatives? Cross-referencing the tablet's hidden names with Babylonian court records reveals a devastating irony. The most prolific informant, a man the code calls the Potter, appears in legal texts as a beloved ceramics merchant granted land near the palace for services to the crown. His actual service, smuggling Assyrian spies into the city as apprentices. Another agent, the singer, wasn't a musician at all, but a temple eunuch whose high-pitched voice could carry messages during rituals without arousing suspicion. Their tradecraft was impeccable. One report details how they used the reflective properties of polished bronze votive plates to flash signals across the Euphrates at dawn, when the angle of sunlight made them visible only from specific watchtowers. Yet the real tragedy lies in the margins. Between the lines of military intelligence are personal pleas, requests for evacuation, worried questions about families back in Assyria, even a crude drawing of a bird with its wings clipped. These weren't faceless assets, they were patriots stranded on enemy soil, watching their homeland crumble while their warnings vanished into the bureaucratic abyss. The last decipherable line on the tablet reads simply, "The canal smells of rotten reeds," a code phrase meaning the network had been compromised. Archaeologists found this tablet not in some royal archive, but in the ruins of a modest bakery near Nineveh's docks. The spy who risked everything to send it likely never knew if it reached its destination. And the bitterest twist, the baker's oven where it was hidden still held charred loaves when excavated, their blackened crusts preserving the shape of a final, uneaten meal. Some secrets don't just hide in plain sight, they die there. So what does it all mean? These 25 secrets aren't just footnotes in history, they're seismic shifts in how we understand the Assyrian Empire. Every shattered tablet, every altered relief, every hidden curse forces us to rewrite the story we thought we knew. This wasn't just an empire of brute force and bloodshed. It was a labyrinth of psychological warfare, technological innovation, and bureaucratic precision so advanced, we're only now catching up to their ingenuity. Think about it, a civilization that weaponized sound, poisoned its own treaties, and encoded military strategies in the stars. A culture where women pulled strings from the shadows, artists staged silent rebellions in stone, and spies smuggled secrets in plain sight. The Assyrians didn't just dominate the ancient world, they outsmarted it, leaving behind clues so obvious we walked past them for centuries. That's the real lesson here. History isn't just written by the winners, it's hidden in the cracks, the corrections, the things someone tried desperately to erase. The next time you stand before an ancient artifact in a museum, don't just glance. Lean in, study the chips in the stone, the stains on the clay, the faintest marks that don't quite fit, because the truth, it's rarely in the grand narrative. It's in the whispers, and right now, those whispers are in danger. Looting, conflict, and neglect are erasing Mesopotamia's heritage faster than we can uncover it. Every stolen relic isn't just a lost object, it's a page torn from humanity's collective memory. If this journey through Assyria's secrets has taught us anything, it's that the past still has urgent stories to tell, but only if we protect its voice. Want to keep unraveling history's greatest mysteries with us? Hit subscribe and join the hunt, because the next revelation, it's waiting just beneath the surface, and together we might just be the ones to uncover it.